Hello everyone, welcome back to the YouTube channel. Before we get started, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Also, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And don't forget to support me on Patreon. The link is in the description and pinned comment. Your support helps me keep this channel going and continue creating more videos for you. Now, let's get into the video. I moved into the duplex in March of 2017, right after the divorce finalized. My ex kept the house. I needed somewhere close to the warehouse on the east side of Spokane because I just started nights there, inventory and receiving, and I didn't have a car that was going to survive a long commute in winter. The duplex was one of those side-by-side setups where you share one interior wall. It was fine. It was what I could afford. The guy on the other side was named Rick. He told me that the first time I was carrying boxes in from the truck, he came out, introduced himself, said he was retired, had lived there 11 years, electrician. He was maybe 65, heavy-set, kept his yard extremely neat. That is honestly everything I thought about him for the first couple weeks. The thing I should tell you before anything else is that I was not sleeping right. Night shifts do that. You sleep from like 8 in the morning until 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and then you're just up until you have to go in at 10. So there were a lot of hours in that apartment with nothing happening. I was still raw from the divorce. I was not in great shape. I am telling you that because later I spent a long time trying to explain things to myself as exhaustion, and I want to be honest that exhaustion was in fact present. That is a fair thing to note. The changes started around the 3rd week. Small things. The bathroom mirror was on one of those medicine cabinet hinges, and I keep it angled a certain way because of where the light comes in. I notice when it's different because I shave at the same time every day, and I'm used to exactly where my face sits in the glass. One afternoon I went to shave, and the mirror was angled about 15 degrees further left than I keep it. I moved it back and didn't think about it past that. 2 days later, the kitchen chair was pushed out from the table at an angle. Not far, maybe a foot. But I push it back straight every time I get up because the table is small and otherwise I can't get to the sink. I pushed it back. I thought I was forgetting things. I thought it was the sleep schedule. Then the bedroom window. I had checked every lock in the apartment the first week I moved in because the neighborhood was fine, but I was by myself, and I wanted to know what I had to work with. The bedroom window had a latch that I kept closed. I checked it every few days out of habit. Sometime in the 4th week I went to check it, and it was unlocked. Not open, just unlocked. I locked it again. I could not remember the last time I had touched it. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know that I could have done any of these things myself. The mirror, the chair, the window. People do things on autopilot and don't remember. I know that. I am not saying I was certain then. I am just telling you what I noticed. Rick and I didn't talk much. He was out in the mornings when I was getting home, walking or doing something in the yard. We'd wave. Sometimes he'd say something about the weather or about the truck he was always working on. He was polite. He had this way of smiling that wasn't unfriendly, but also didn't quite reach anywhere. Like the smile was just the expression his face made in the presence of another person. The fish thing I found out about from the smell. There was a shared laundry room between our 2 units. Just a little connector room with a door on each side, and you could smell Rick's apartment through it. Warm water, filter running, that faint algae smell. He had tanks. I could see them through his window once when I was checking the mail. These big lit-up tanks along the whole living room wall. Tropical fish, lots of color, very still water. He'd be sitting in front of them in a recliner sometimes. I mention all of this because it is true and because I want you to understand that I had real details about this man. He was not a mystery to me. He was just a neighbor. The first time he said something that stopped me, I was coming in from a grocery run. He was in the driveway. He said, "You finally got that drip taken care of." I asked him what he meant. He said the sink. The drip under the kitchen sink. I had looked at the pipe under the sink 2 days before. I got down there with a flashlight, saw the fitting was loose, figured I'd have to get a wrench and come back to it. I had not fixed it. I had not mentioned it to anyone. I had not called the landlord yet. I had just looked at it and left it. I told Rick I hadn't actually fixed it yet. He nodded like I had confirmed something and went back to whatever he was doing. I went inside and stood in the kitchen for a while. I went and looked under the sink again. The pipe was the same. Nothing had changed. I don't know what I was checking for. The package was the one that got me. My daughter was living with her mom in Coeur d'Alene. She was 7. I'd found this stuffed rabbit at a store, kind of thing she'd been asking about, and I wrapped it up and addressed it, and I did that at my kitchen table around 1 in the morning. Blinds closed, lights on in the kitchen, the rest of the apartment dark. I mailed it from the post office before my shift the next night. I did not tell anyone about it. I did not mention it on the phone to my daughter because I wanted it to be a surprise. About a week after I mailed it, Rick was out front when I pulled in. He asked how my daughter liked the rabbit. I stopped walking. He said something like, "Kids love those," or something like that, and went back inside. I sat in my car. I was trying to think of any way he could know that. Any conversation we'd had, any moment where I had mentioned my daughter, or a package, or anything like that. We talked about the weather a handful of times. He knew I worked nights. I think I had said once that I had a kid. That was it. That was the whole of what I had given him. I went through the apartment that evening, and I looked at every wall, every vent, every place where one unit connected to the other. I don't know what I thought I was going to find. I didn't find anything. The wall between us was just drywall, standard construction. I pressed my ear against it in a couple places and could hear the tank filters, faint, and that was all. In November it started getting cold, and we had a few days of freezing rain. I lost my key somewhere between the car and the door. I know I had it when I left for my shift because I locked the deadbolt, and I remember feeling it in my jacket pocket when I got to the warehouse. When I got home it was gone. I don't know where I lost it. I looked in the car. I looked on the ground. I tore the apartment apart for 2 hours. I had a spare key, but I'd left it with my ex-wife at the beginning of the year and never got another one made. It was around 3 in the morning. I'd been looking for probably an hour and a half. There was a soft knock at my door. Rick was standing there in a bathrobe, holding my key between 2 fingers. He said he found it. I reached for it, and he held it for just a moment before he let go. I don't know how to describe the length of time, except to say it was longer than the length of time when you're handing someone something and they take it. Then he asked why I'd been in the crawl space. I said what? He said the night before last, or something like that. He said he'd seen the access panel open, heard me in the crawl space. 3 or 4 weeks before this, I had started hearing something under my floor. Not every night. A sound like something moving, intermittent, slow. I had thought it was pipes at first. Then one night, it seemed more directional, like it was moving from the center of my living room floor toward the wall I shared with Rick. I had not gone into the crawl space. I had not opened the access panel. I had not told anyone about the noise, because I wasn't sure what it was, and I didn't want to call the landlord about nothing. I told Rick I hadn't been in the crawl space. He looked at me the same way he always looked at me. He said, and went back to his apartment. I stood in my doorway holding the key. The freezing rain had picked back up, and I could hear it on the metal roof of the carport. I looked down at the key in my hand, which was definitely my key, the hardware store copy with the orange grip that I'd made in August. I went inside and I locked the door. I put the chain on, which I'd never used before. I stood in my living room, and I looked at the floor. I looked at the place where I thought the sound had come from, which was roughly in the center of the room, near the TV stand. I got down and pressed my ear against the carpet. I don't know what I was doing. I stayed like that for a minute. There was nothing. I put a piece of tape over the crawlspace access panel in my hall closet. One piece of tape laid horizontally across the seam. I don't know exactly why I did that. It seemed like a way of knowing. The tape was still there in the morning. It was still there every morning after that. The whole rest of the time I lived there. I gave notice at the end of November. I told the landlord I needed to be closer to family. That was not true, but it was something I could say. I had found a room in a house on the north side being rented by a guy from my shift. I moved my stuff over 3 days. Rick was home all 3 days, and he watched me load the truck each time, with that same polite expression. On the last day, he waved from his porch. He said it was good having me as a neighbor. I don't know where he found my key. I drove a different route every day, and I couldn't tell you where between my car and the door. I might have dropped it in the freezing rain, but I could have dropped it. That happens. That is a thing that happens to people. I don't know how he knew about the sink or the package. I have thought about it a lot, and I have not come up with anything that works. I've thought about whether there was something going on with the laundry room, whether you could somehow hear through that connector space better than I thought. I've thought about the window, whether it came in while I was sleeping, and I just didn't know. I've thought about the crawl space. The thing about the crawl space is that I never actually went down there to look. I put the tape on the panel, and the tape stayed, and I told myself that meant something, and then I moved out. So I don't know what was under there. I still don't know. I think about that sometimes. What I would have found if I'd gone down to look, but I didn't, so I can't tell you. So my aunt died in July and left this lake house to me and my sister. That is the whole setup. She had no kids. Our mom was her only sibling, and she left the place to us because she liked us better than the cousins on our dad's side. That is what the lawyer said. Basically, that is not the point. The point is that in September of that year, 2004, me and my sister drove up to northern Michigan to clean the place out so we could put it on the market. We were going to stay 2 nights. That was the plan. My sister is 3 years older than me. Her name is Renee. That matters because at a certain point in what I am going to tell you, she said something to me from a room that did not have a window facing the direction she was describing. I have not been able to work out how she knew what she knew. I am still not able to work that out. We got there around dusk on a Friday. The drive was about 4 hours, and we had stopped once for gas. The house was at the end of a gravel road off the county highway, and when we pulled in, there was a cloud of gnats around the porch light that someone must have left on. I don't know who. The state lawyer, maybe. There were only 3 cabins on that whole stretch of shoreline. Ours, which sat closest to the road, then a gap of maybe 2 empty lots, and then a rental cabin that the lawyer had mentioned was vacant that time of year, and then past that, set back much farther from the water and almost into the trees, there was a green cabin, dark green, like the color of a garden hose. Every window on the front of it had aluminum foil taped over it from the inside. Renee made a joke about it. She said it looked like someone trying to hide from satellites. I said yeah, and we brought the cooler in, and that was about the extent of it. I want to be clear about the foil because I think about it. It wasn't like someone had done it sloppily or partway. It covered the whole window on each one. Neat enough that it looked deliberate. Someone had taken time with it. That's all I can say about it. I noticed it, and then we went inside and started moving boxes around. Sometime after we got there, while it was still light enough to see the other properties from our porch, I looked over toward the green cabin, and there was a man standing next to it. He was holding a rake, holding it up against his shoulder like a soldier holds a rifle, upright, with one hand. He was just standing there facing more or less in our direction. I watched him for maybe a minute. He didn't move, not to shift his weight, not to look away, not anything. I went back inside to help Renee with the boxes, and I didn't say anything about him because there was nothing to say. A man standing in his own yard is not something you say. By the time it was full dark, I looked again, and he was gone. The yard next to the green cabin was empty. I figured he had gone in for the night, and that was the last I thought about him until later. I went to sleep around 11. Renee stayed up reading in the front room and came to bed after me. The bedroom situation was that there were 2 bedrooms upstairs. Renee took the one at the end of the hall, and I took the one at the top of the stairs. My window faced the lake. Her window faced the back of the property, which was just the tree line. At around 1 in the morning I woke up. I didn't know what time it was exactly until I looked at my phone, but it was somewhere around 1. I woke up because I heard the screen door downstairs slap shut. It was the kind of sound that means someone just let it go without holding it. I lay there for a second and figured Renee had gone outside for something. Air, cigarette, whatever. She used to smoke occasionally, and she had mentioned wanting to see the lake at night. I waited and didn't hear her come back in. Then I got up and went downstairs. The kitchen was empty. The overhead light was on, which I was pretty sure I had turned off before bed. But maybe I hadn't. There were moths going around the bulb. The screen door was closed. I pushed on it and it opened normally. No lock. That was just how the door was. I looked at the porch and there was nothing there. I called Renee's name once, not loud, just in a regular voice. No answer. I looked through the window above the sink, because that window faces the dock. The dock went out about 30 feet over the water, and there was enough moon that I could see the end of it. The man was standing on the dock. Same posture. Rake against the shoulder. Same hand. Same angle. Standing at the far end looking out at the water, or looking at nothing. I don't know. Just standing there. I want to explain why this is the thing I keep getting stuck on. The green cabin was not close to our dock. To get from where he had been standing in his own yard to our dock, you would have had to walk along the gravel path that runs the whole length of the shoreline, past the empty rental, past our property line, and then out to the end of our dock. That is at least 70 yards of gravel. I did not hear footsteps. I did not hear the dock creak when he walked out on it. The screen door woke me up, and I was downstairs within 2 or 3 minutes. I don't see how he could have walked that far in that time without making any noise on gravel. I am not saying he didn't. I'm saying I don't see how. I locked the back door, which I know now was not going to stop anything if he actually wanted to come in. But I locked it. Then I went upstairs. I walked fast enough that I hit my shin on the banister at the top of the stairs. Hard enough that I had to stop for a second. I went down the hall to Renee's room. She was already sitting up in bed. Not like she had just woken up. Sitting up awake, with her hands in her lap. I started to say something about the dock. She said, and I'm telling you this as close to exact as I can, she said, "How did he get to the side yard that fast?" That is what she said. Her window faced the back of the house. The tree line, not the side yard. There was no window in that room that faced the side yard. I walked into that room right after her, and I know what the windows were. She was not in a position to see the side yard from where she was. I don't know what she was seeing, or when she had seen it. I asked her what she meant, and she said she had heard something on the gravel path between our place and the rental earlier, while she was still reading. She said she looked out the front window and saw him walking along the path toward our property. And then she went upstairs to bed, and she said she looked out through a gap in the curtain and saw him again, in the side yard, and she said she couldn't work out the timing of it. I don't know which window she thought she was looking out of. I don't know if she was more asleep than she seemed. I don't know if she got turned around in an unfamiliar house at night. I have asked her about it since, and she says she doesn't want to talk about it, and that is her right. We left the next morning. We did not stay the second night. We called the lawyer from the road and told him we had done what we needed to do, which was not true, and he arranged for someone else to handle the rest of the estate clearing. We sold the place the following spring to a couple from Ohio. I do not know if they ever had any issue with the neighbor in the green cabin. I have not looked into it. I think about the foil on the windows sometimes. I think about how it was neat, how someone had sat there and done each window the same way. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know if it connects to anything. The rake bothers me more. Why you would carry a rake at 1 in the morning? Why you would carry it like that, upright, against your shoulder, walking that far along a path in the dark? Those are the things I keep coming back to. I have not come up with a good reason for any of them. I am not sure there is one, but I also can't say there isn't. I don't know what the man was doing. I don't know how he moved the way he moved without making noise. I don't know what Renee saw from a window that shouldn't have shown her what she described. I have not been back to that part of Michigan. That's about all I have. So I took this fisheries contract up the coast, maybe 8 months ago now. Nobody else wanted it, which I knew going in. But the money was real and I needed real money, so I found a basement apartment in the town closest to the survey site. The landlord's name was Aldrich, which I don't know. I'd never heard that name before. He was maybe 60, heavy-set, moved slow. He had an adult son who lived with him. I never got the son's name. I asked once and Aldrich said it, and I immediately lost it. Something that didn't land right in my ear. The apartment was below grade. You came down an exterior staircase on the side of the house, unlocked a door, and you were in it. 1 bedroom, kitchen, bathroom. The ceiling was low. The building sat maybe 2 blocks from the water, and everything in the apartment had that slightly damp quality, like the walls had been wet at some point and dried, but remembered it. The rent was low, and I was not in a position to be particular. The contract was tide-based sampling, which means your schedule is not a schedule, it's a rotation. The tides don't care when you want to sleep. So within the first 2 weeks, I was getting up at 2 in the morning, working until 9, sleeping from noon to 6, then back out before the next window. That kind of pattern breaks something in you pretty fast. I knew that going in too. I'd done seasonal work before. I thought I knew how bad it would get. The ceiling carried sound in a way I hadn't experienced in any other apartment. This is something I've tried to explain to people before, and it doesn't land right. So let me try to be specific. When someone walks directly across a floor above you, you hear the steps. They go from one side to the other. It makes sense. In this apartment, the steps didn't do that. They went in curves. They'd start at one end of the house, arc toward the middle, then back, then forward again. Not pacing. Pacing is back and forth, and it has a logic to it. This was different. This was like if you track someone's path on paper, it would look like a drawing of something, but you couldn't see what from where you were standing. I mentioned it to Aldrich after the first week. I caught him in the morning when I was coming back in from a sample run. I said I was having trouble sleeping because of the noise upstairs at night. He looked at me, not unkindly, and said they were asleep by 9, both of them, every night. He said this like it was just a fact he was reporting. I said okay. I mentioned it again maybe a week after that, because there had been 2 nights in a row where it sounded like furniture being moved. Not slid, dragged. A heavy irregular dragging that stopped and started and went on for hours. I went up the exterior stairs and knocked at 11 at night, and Aldrich came to the door in clothes, not pajamas, and said they hadn't moved anything. They'd been asleep. He said it the same way, reporting a fact. He didn't seem annoyed. He didn't seem like I'd woken him up. He just said it. I started writing down the nights. Not every night, but the bad ones. Times, descriptions of the sounds, how long they went. I don't know what I thought I was going to do with that. At some point I stopped writing them down because looking at the list made me feel like I was doing something that wasn't going to help. The things I was finding in the apartment, I want to be careful about how I describe those because I'm aware of what it sounds like. Wet dirt in the bathtub, twice. Not mud tracked in, not a smear, just a small pile of wet dark dirt sitting in the center of the tub. Salt under the kitchen table, 2nd or 3rd week. Not salt spilled, like an even thin spread of it, which I would have had to put there deliberately, and I didn't. A button on the bathroom floor, white 4-hole, the kind that comes off a dress shirt, and I don't own any shirts with buttons like that. I'm not saying those things were impossible. I'm saying I couldn't account for them, and at the time I was sleeping in pieces of 3 and 4 hours, and eating badly, and spending long hours in cold spray, and I was aware that this was all going on simultaneously with me noticing these things. I want to be accurate about that. I was not in good shape. I knew that. The son, I want to say something accurate about him. He was maybe 30, or somewhere around there. Hard to tell. He wore earmuffs everywhere, inside the house, in July all the time. The foam kind. The big ones, orange, like you'd were operating machinery. I saw him most mornings when I was coming back in from early runs, because sometimes he'd be at the top of the exterior stairs for no reason I could see, just standing there. He'd hear me coming up the path, and he'd turn, not toward me exactly, more like toward the general direction of the sound, and he'd stand there with his head tilted maybe 15 degrees, while I came up and unlocked my door. Every time. And he never said anything. Aldrich told me once, and only once, that the son had sensory issues, and I took that at face value and didn't push on it. But the earmuffs. There's a thing that happens when someone is blocking sound. You can see it in how they hold their head. They're managing the incoming. The son did not do that. He stood with his head tilted and his hands pressing the earmuffs tight over his ears, and he was not managing incoming. He was doing something else. I don't have a more accurate way to say that. The power went out in the 5th week. Heavy fog had come in that afternoon, which happens there. It comes off the water and sits on everything. I was between rotations. I'd slept a few hours in the afternoon and gotten up around 8, and the power went out maybe 10 minutes after I got up. No warning, just gone. I got my phone out for light, and I thought I'd go up and check if it was a blown fuse or if it was the whole street. That was the practical thing to do. I went up the exterior stairs. I knocked. I heard movement on the other side of the door, and then Aldrich opened it. He opened it about halfway and stood in the gap. I could see past him. The living room was directly in front of the door. Every piece of furniture in the room had been pushed to the walls. The couch, both chairs, the side tables, the television stand, all of it against the walls in a ring, which left the center of the room open. The carpet in the center was dark, not what like from a spilled drink. Dark the way fabric gets when something heavy and what has been pulled across it. It was a large area, and it was not fresh, or it didn't look fresh. It looked like it had been there for a little while. The sun was in the kitchen, which I could see because the kitchen was open to the living room. He was sitting on the counter, cross-legged, and he was looking directly at me. Not in my direction, at me. He did not have the earmuffs on. Aldrich said the whole street was probably out. Said he'd call the power company in the morning. Said good night. He said all of this in the same reporting of fact tone, and he closed the door. I went back downstairs. I lay down on the bed with my phone in my hand. At some point I heard the knocking start. Not a person knocking, not that rhythm. Slow, spaced out knocking moving from one end of the house to the other, under the floor directly above me. Moving from the front of the house toward the back in a straight line, and then stopping. Once, one pass, front to back, and then nothing. I've thought about what the carpet looked like a lot. There are explanations. You can think of them as fast as I can. A leak from outside, a pipe issue. They'd moved the furniture to deal with it. The sun was on the counter because the floor was wet. That is a complete explanation, and I cannot find a factual problem with it. The earmuffs being off. I've tried to fit that in. Maybe it was warm. Maybe they bother him in certain situations and not others. I don't know enough about sensory issues to say that's wrong. I finished the contract 3 weeks after that. I'd already decided to leave before the last incident, so it wasn't because of that. The contract just ended and there was no extension offered, and I cleared out. I didn't say anything to Aldrich when I left. I said goodbye and handed him the keys, and he shook my hand. I didn't say anything about the carpet or the furniture or any of it. I'm not sure what I would have said. I had looked up the property once online, and it had been on the rental market a lot, which in that town and with that rent didn't necessarily mean anything. But it had been on the market a lot. The thing I keep coming back to isn't the carpet or even the knocking. It's the sun looking at me. Because up until that moment, he had never once looked directly at me. And I'd been living under them for 5 weeks, and I'd been in his line of sight many times. The first and only time he looked at me directly was when he didn't have the earmuffs on. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means anything. I'm aware that there are probably normal reasons for all of it, and that I was not sleeping or eating properly for most of the time I was there, and that this matters when you're trying to remember things accurately. I know all of that. I still have the log I kept, the dates and the sounds and the times. I haven't looked at it in a couple months. I don't know why I kept it. We bought the house in 2021. Interest rates were low, and we had a 6-month-old, and my wife's mother kept saying it was time. So we bought it. Narrow brick row house on Marlowe Street. The inspector said the neighborhood was coming up. We had no reason not to believe him. The man across the alley, everybody called him Leon. I don't know if that was actually his name. I never asked, and nobody said it like it was a nickname. They just called him Leon, and he answered to it. Mid-60s, I'd guess. Very neat. He wore pressed shirts even when he was just out back sweeping, which he did every morning. He'd sweep the alley for a long time, moving cigarette filters and bottle caps into these small piles at the edges. I watched him do it from the kitchen window a few times before I even knew who he was. At first, he was just a neighbor who was helpful. My wife had a C-section with our son, so the first few weeks home, she couldn't lift much. Leon saw her struggling with packages one day and carried them up for her without making it into a thing. He didn't linger, just did it and went back across the alley. Then at some point our gate latch had been loose for a couple weeks, kept swinging open, and one morning it was fixed. New hardware on it. Leon had done it without asking or saying anything. There were a couple small toys left on the porch too, at different points. A rubber elephant. One of those plastic rings with keys on it. The kind of thing babies chew on. My wife thought it was thoughtful. Our son's name is Marcus. He was born in February 2021, and he was healthy, no problems. He slept away baby sleep, which means not enough and at the wrong times, and my wife and I were both pretty used to running on not a lot of sleep by the time summer came around. Leon first said something that stuck with me in maybe July. He was out in the alley when my wife had Marcus on the back steps, just sitting out there in the heat. Leon came over to the fence, and they talked for a few minutes, and I was inside and didn't hear it. But my wife came in afterward and said Leon had told her she was letting Marcus sleep too much during the day, that he'd be up all night if she kept doing that. She said it like she wasn't sure whether to be annoyed or just file it away. We didn't really talk about it after that. A few weeks later, I came home from work, and my wife met me at the door, and her face was the face she makes when she doesn't want to say something in front of Marcus. So I knew something was off before she said anything. She told me she'd been inside with the baby, and when she went to check the back porch, she found Leon standing there, on our steps. Not in the alley, not at the fence. Actually on our porch steps. He had the baby monitor receiver in his hand. The receiver, not the transmitter. The little handheld one we carried around so we could hear Marcus when we were in different rooms. My wife had left it outside by accident when she brought him in. Leon said he'd been checking the signal. I didn't know what that meant, and my wife didn't know what that meant, and we talked about it that night after Marcus was down, and neither of us could figure out what it meant. He'd been checking the signal. Checking it for what? The signal was either there or it wasn't, and it wasn't his monitor, and there was no reason for him to touch it. We couldn't work out what he thought he was doing, or what he wanted us to think. My wife wanted me to say something to him. I said I would, and then I kept not doing it, because I could never figure out what to say. He hadn't broken anything, hadn't gone inside, hadn't taken it. He had just been standing on our porch holding a thing that wasn't his. After that, things changed in ways that were hard to describe when they were happening. The stroller we kept on the back porch would have mud on the wheels some mornings. Not dirt, actual mud, like it had been taken somewhere and brought back. We had a jogging stroller with big wheels, and we would have noticed if we'd gone anywhere muddy. And we hadn't gone anywhere muddy. My wife noticed it first, and I checked, and she was right. There was mud in the wheel treads, and we went back and forth about whether we'd just forgotten to walk or gotten confused about which days we'd gone out. We couldn't figure it out. It happened 3 or 4 times over the fall. At some point, my wife was going through the recycling before she put it out, and she noticed the takeout bags we'd been saving. The paper ones from a Thai place we ordered from pretty often. They had our address on the receipts that were stuffed inside them, and the receipts were gone. Not just fallen out, gone from all the bags. She didn't say anything to me right away. She just started watching for it. And the next time she found bags with the receipts removed. She told me, and we both stood in the kitchen looking at the bags and not saying what we were both thinking. We talked about calling someone. I looked into what you could actually call, what you could actually report. Someone taking your receipts out of your own trash bags before pickup isn't a crime. Someone being on your porch when you left something out there is harder to explain, but also hard to make into something official. We talked to our neighbor on the other side, a woman named Patricia, who'd lived on the block for a long time. She said Leon had been there as long as she had, and had always been like that. Particular, she said, real particular about things. She said he'd had a grandson who died. That might have been it. She didn't say more than that, and we didn't push. My wife stopped opening the blinds on the alley-facing side. Not all at once. She just started defaulting to leaving them. Then one afternoon, she told me she'd looked out, and Leon was already standing there. Not that he'd come out while she was watching, but that she'd lifted the blind, and he was already there, already looking at the window. And she didn't know how long he'd been there. He was just standing in the alley with his broom, not sweeping, holding it, looking at our window. I want to explain the baby monitor. It was a standard one. It came with two parts. The transmitter went in Marcus's room, plugged in, always on. It was white and sat on the dresser next to his crib. The receiver was the handheld part, ran on batteries, had a speaker and a volume knob and a small light that went green when it was picking up the signal. We kept the receiver in our room at night. We'd moved Marcus into his own room when he was around 5 months, so his room was across the hall from ours. And with the monitor, we could hear everything, every little shuffle, every sound he made in his sleep. I need to say this carefully because I've gone back and forth about it, and I want to say it the way it actually was. In December, there was a bad sleet storm, maybe the 18th or 19th. Marcus was 10 months old. My wife and I had gone to bed around 11. I woke up because the monitor made a sound. Not a loud sound. The monitor makes a kind of crackling sound when the signal shifts, and that was what I heard. And it woke me up, because even in sleep you get tuned to it. The room was dark. I could see the green light on the receiver on my nightstand. It was on. I picked it up and held it and listened. Not crying. Breathing. It was the wrong breathing. Not Marcus. Marcus breathes fast when he sleeps. Shallow and quick. The way babies do. And you learn that sound. This was slow. In and out. A person sitting still and breathing slowly. I don't know how long I listened. Maybe 30 seconds. Maybe less. My wife was asleep next to me. Then a voice. Low. Not whispering exactly, but quiet. The way you talk in a dark room. It said he's awake now. I was across the hall in Marcus's room in maybe 4 or 5 seconds. The light from the hall came in the door. Marcus was in his crib. He was awake. He was standing up holding the rail, the way he'd learned to do. And he looked at me when I came in. The transmitter was on the dresser where it always was. I checked the window. The window was closed and locked. I checked the closet. I checked under the crib, which I knew made no sense, but I checked it. I stood in the room with Marcus for a while, and he started to fuss a little, and I picked him up and walked the hall and looked down the stairs, and then went back to the bedroom. My wife woke up when I came back in. I told her Marcus was awake. I didn't say the other part right away. I stood at the window that faces the alley and looked out. Sleet on the glass. I couldn't see much. A light on in the back of Leon's house. I told my wife what I'd heard. I told her the slow breathing and the voice. We sat in the bed and talked about it for a while, quietly, with Marcus between us. We talked about whether the monitor could pick up another signal, whether it worked like that, whether there was interference from somewhere that could sound like a voice. My wife looked it up on her phone. Those kinds of monitors can sometimes pick up other signals. It does happen. They run on certain frequencies, and other devices can bleed in. We didn't go back to sleep. Around 6, I went downstairs and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched the alley. Leon came out at 7. He swept the sleet off the alley in that careful way he had. He did the piles at the edges. He didn't look up at our window that I saw. I knocked on his door at 8 o'clock. He answered it quickly, like he'd been near the door. He was already dressed, already in a pressed shirt. I don't know what I planned to say. I asked him if everything was all right, if the storm had caused him any problems. He said no, just the sleet to clear. He asked how the baby was sleeping. I said fine. He said good. That's good. At this age, you want them sleeping well. I went back across the alley. We listed the house the following March. We said we were upsizing, which was true enough. Marcus was going to need a room of his own eventually anyway. We closed in May. I drove down Marlowe Street once about 6 months after we moved out. I don't know why. I was in that part of the city. Leon's car was in its spot behind his house. There was a small toy on his back steps. I could not tell if it was one of the ones he'd left for Marcus, or just something that happened to be there. I didn't slow down. I had this sublet for about 6 weeks while I was doing drywall work after a hurricane came through. This was down south, not where I'm from. The job was clean up and rebuild, mostly interior stuff, and the sublet was the cheapest thing in walking distance of the transit line. The building was above a bakery that had been closed since before I got there. You could still smell it in the walls. There were 4 rooms on the floor. I was in one. 3 other people had the rest. But in 6 weeks, I only got a clear count on 2 of them. People cycled through. The landlord had a guy who showed up to collect cash once a week, and that was the only real contact anyone had with whoever owned the place. My door had 1 lock. Everyone else had at least 2. Some had 3. I asked about it once, the first week. The guy who collected said the landlord hadn't gotten around to it. I didn't push it because the rent was low, and I wasn't planning to stay. The woman across from me, I don't know her name. I never knew it. She was maybe 40, maybe younger. It's hard to say. She smoked clove cigarettes out her window that faced a fire escape. I could smell them in the mornings. If we passed in the hall, she would nod. Not like she was being friendly. More like she was just acknowledging I existed. She never spoke. Not once in 6 weeks. Not until the night I'm trying to tell you about. The work was running long because the crew kept getting reassigned to different sites. I was doing 10, 12-hour days sometimes. That night I got back close to midnight. I had been on a site with a lot of particulate. You could feel it in your throat. And I remember thinking about the shower before I even got up the stairs. The hallway had this particular smell. Bleach and the old fryer oil from below. And I noticed it the way you notice something when you're tired and your senses are a little raw. I had my door open and my bag down and my boots off before I heard the pounding. It was coming from the stairwell side of the building, from the bottom, not from the street, from inside the building, downstairs, near the entrance. And someone was yelling something. It took me a second to work out what it was, because I was half checked out already. They were yelling my room number. Not my name, my room number, and the pounding kept going. I didn't know what to do with that. I stood there for a second. I went to the door and I opened it about halfway, thinking I would listen before I did anything else. The woman from across the hall was standing right there. She was barefoot. Her feet were wet, both of them, and there was water on the floor in the hall, like she had tracked it in or it had come off her. There was blood coming down her right shin. Not pouring, just running, like a cut that had been going for a minute. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me, back toward the stairwell, the direction she had come from. She said, "Don't let him upstairs." That was it. That was the whole thing she said. And then the building moved. I don't have a better word for it. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a collapse. It was more like something hit the bakery shutters from outside with a lot of weight behind it. The pipes in the wall rattled, and there was a sound like a padlock hitting metal, and then it was over. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds. I moved to the stair rail and looked down. The stairwell has one fixture at each landing, and below that the entry is lit by the exit sign. That read. I could see the bottom from where I was. There was a man standing in the entry. He was tall. I'm not short, and I can judge height reasonably well. He was tall enough that the exit sign, which was mounted at about 7 feet, was at approximately his eye level. He had his back mostly to me, or his side. I couldn't get a clean angle on his face. He was not moving. He was just standing there in the dark below the sign. I want to be careful here, because this is the part one keep going over. I don't know how long he had been there. The pounding had stopped by then. The yelling had stopped. I don't know if he was the one doing it, or if he came in after, or if the pounding came from somewhere else entirely. I don't know. She grabbed my wrist. The woman. She had come up to the rail, and she grabbed me hard enough that her nails went into the skin on the inside of my wrist. Not on purpose, I think. Just from how she was holding on. She said, "You saw him before, right?" She said it like a question, but she was not really asking. She was watching the entry below us. I told her no. She turned and looked at me, and the way she looked at me was like I had said something she did not believe. Like she thought I was lying. She didn't say that. She just looked at me that way. And then she turned back to the rail. I don't know what to do with the look. That's the part one come back to more than anything else, actually. Not what happened next, but that look. Because either she thought I knew the man and was pretending I didn't, or she thought I had seen him in the building before and had some reason to keep that to myself. Or there was some third thing she believed that I don't have a way to get at, and I don't know which it was. I have thought about it, and I don't know. Below us the man bent. That's the only word I have. He bent. Not forward, not backward. Sideways, at an angle that, I don't know. I don't know how to say this without it sounding like I'm making it into something it wasn't. A person's torso doesn't do that. I know that. But I also know what I saw, and it did. He bent to one side, and then he straightened, and he put his foot on the first step. He did not use the handrail. He came up the center of the stairs. I don't know what happened after that, and that's the true thing I have to tell you. The thing that makes it hard to talk about. Not because something terrible happened that I can't say, but because I don't know what happened, and I've had a long time to think about whether I can fill it in, and I can't. What I know is that at some point I was back in my room with the door shut, and my back against it. I know I had my work knife in my right hand, not opened, just in my hand. I know that at some point I became aware that I had been hearing nothing for a while. No footsteps on the stairs. No voices. Nothing from the woman's room. Nothing from any of the other rooms. The building was quiet the way it got late on weeknights, when no one was moving around. I don't know when I moved from the rail to my door. I don't know if the woman came with me, or went to her own room, or what she did. I don't have any memory of that sequence. I've tried to work it out and I can't. In the morning there was nothing in the hallway. No water on the floor. No blood that I could see. The woman's door was closed. I knocked once, not loud, and nothing happened. I didn't knock again. I went to work. The job ran another 11 days after that. I saw her twice in the hallway during those 11 days. She nodded. She didn't say anything. She didn't look at me differently. Or if she did, I couldn't read it. The second time I saw her, I almost stopped her. I almost said something. I don't know what I would have said. I kept walking. When I left early one morning, and her door was closed, and I didn't knock. I had thought about it the night before, and I decided not to. I don't know if that was right. Here's what I've tried to work out. 1. The man was someone she knew and was afraid of, and something happened in the building that night that I missed some part of. 2. The man was someone none of us knew, and he came into the building for some other reason that had nothing to do with any of us. 3. Something happened to me with the particulate or the hours, or just being run down, and what I saw at the bottom of those stairs was not what I think I saw. I lean toward one of those 3, but I don't settle on it and stay there. I go back and forth. The thing I can't explain I've already said. The way he moved. I don't explain that away. I don't have a version of the 3 options where that makes sense, and I've looked for one. The other thing is the look she gave me. when I said I hadn't seen him before. That look is in the category of things that don't resolve regardless of which of the three I lean toward that week. I told someone else this once, and they asked me if I went back, and I said no. They asked why, and I said because the job was done, which is true, but it's not the whole answer, and I know that. I don't think about it all the time. It comes up in certain conditions. When I'm on a job with long hours, and I'm running low. When I'm in a building I don't know. It's not that I get scared. It's just that it comes up. Like something unfinished that I keep expecting to have more information on, and I never do. That's about where I run out of things to say about it. My husband got a forestry position up near Black Elk Ridge, so we moved. That's the part you need to know first. We moved, and the house we rented was the only thing available within 40 minutes of his work site, and it had a neighboring property half a mile east that we could see from the kitchen window on clear days. We signed the lease in August. By October, the fence posts on the property line had ice on them every morning. Thick ice, like the cold had come early and intended to stay. I grew up in Wisconsin, so I thought I knew cold, but this was different in that the cold here felt like it was coming from the ground up, not from the sky down. I don't know if that makes sense. It's just the only way I can describe it. Marcus, my husband, was doing timber surveys, which meant he was out most days until 6 or 7, and sometimes later. I was working remotely at the time, customer service for a software company, so I was in the house all day. I want to be specific about that, because it matters. I was in the house during the days and most evenings, and I was paying attention to things the way you pay attention when you're alone, and you don't have a lot else going on. The neighboring house was visible from our kitchen table. White siding, maybe once white. A red barn that leaned a little to the south. When we first moved and I could see cattle in their far field from our upstairs window if the light was right. By October I couldn't see the cattle anymore. I don't know if they brought them in for the winter or what. I assumed they brought them in. I don't know anything about farming schedules. I saw the neighbors twice. Maybe 3 times total the whole time we lived there. The first time was maybe mid-October. A woman hanging sheets on a line in gloves that were way too thick for the work she was doing. Like winter gloves, the kind you ski in, and she was trying to clip sheets with them on. I watched her for a few minutes from the kitchen window. She didn't look toward our house. The second time was the boy. He was a teenager, I think. Hard to say exactly. He was tall but moved like someone who hadn't finished growing into himself yet. A little uncertain in his stride. I saw him twice before the night that I'm getting to. Both times in the early evening. Both times carrying what looked like metal buckets toward the tree line at the back of their property. The trees started maybe 200 yards behind their barn, and they were dense. The kind of evergreen dense where you couldn't see more than 10 or 15 feet, and even in daylight. I mentioned the buckets to Marcus. He said maybe they were feeding something back there, like pigs or something they kept in the woods. I said, why would you keep pigs in the woods? He didn't have an answer for that. We let it go. Around Thanksgiving, I started noticing tracks in the snow between our properties. I want to be careful about how I describe them, because I've gone back and forth about this, and I don't want to say more than I know. They were long impressions, narrow. 2 of them side by side. They weren't hoof prints. They weren't boot prints. They looked almost like if you pressed a very long, very narrow object down into the snow twice, parallel, and then lifted it straight up. They came from the direction of the tree line, and they stopped somewhere between 20 and 30 feet from our porch. Just stopped. No other marks around them. No sign of anything backing up or turning around. They just ended. I looked up animal tracks online for a while and couldn't find anything that matched. I took a photo with my phone. I still have it. I've shown it to a couple people, and nobody has been able to tell me what made them. One person said maybe it was some kind of equipment. I don't know what equipment would leave marks like that in a field where there was no other sign of equipment. The tracks appeared 3 times that I noticed. Always at night. Always in the same general area. Always stopping in the same place relative to the porch. I didn't tell Marcus about the tracks right away. I'm not sure why. I think I wanted to have more information before I said something. I didn't want to be the person who panicked about deer tracks or whatever. So I kept watching. The floodlight at the back of our property was motion activated. It covered maybe 30 feet of the yard behind the house. I'd gotten used to it clicking on for deer, which happened almost every night. So when it clicked on around 2 in the morning, maybe a week before Christmas, it didn't get up right away. I lay there for a minute waiting for it to shut off again. It didn't shut off. I got up and looked through the curtain. The boy was standing at the edge of the floodlit area, right at the edge, so he was half lit and half in the dark. He was holding one of the metal buckets up against his chest with both hands, and there was steam coming off whatever was inside it. He was not looking at our house. He was looking back behind him toward the tree line, which from that angle was completely dark, nothing visible past the first few feet of shadows. He stood there for what I think was about 4 minutes, though I wasn't watching the clock. He didn't move. The bucket steamed. I kept waiting for him to turn around or set the bucket down or do something, but he just stood there looking back at the trees. Then he said something. I couldn't hear it. I was inside, but I could see his mouth moving, and I could tell from the shape of it that it wasn't a lot of words, and his posture was a specific kind of posture. Not scared, more like careful, the way you might talk to something that you needed to not startle. He turned after that and walked back toward his property. He still had the bucket. The floodlight stayed on for another 40 seconds or so, and then clicked off. I went back to bed. I don't know why I went back to bed instead of waking Marcus. I think because there wasn't anything to tell him that would have made sense. A boy was standing in our yard with a bucket. That's all I had. The next morning I went out to look at the snow in that area. There were boot prints where he'd been standing. There were also the narrow marks, the same ones I'd seen before, and they came from the tree line and stopped about 10 feet behind where the boy had been standing. Like whatever made them had come partway and then stopped. I went back inside and told Marcus about the whole thing. The tracks, the boy, everything. He said he wanted to go talk to the neighbors. I said I didn't think that was a good idea, and I couldn't explain why. Just that I didn't. He said that was fair, and that we should just keep an eye on it. He took a photo of the tracks that morning, too. We kept an eye on it, which mostly meant I kept an eye on it, because Marcus was gone all day. Nothing happened for about a week. No tracks, floodlight stayed off. I didn't see the boy. Then 2 nights before Christmas, I heard something outside. Not a sound I can describe well, because I've tried a few times, and it always comes out wrong. It wasn't loud. It was low, and it repeated at irregular intervals, like something making a sound every 30 seconds or a minute, but not on any exact schedule. I sat in the kitchen and listened to it for a while. It was coming from the direction of the tree line. Eventually it stopped. Marcus heard it too that night. He'd gotten home late. He stood in the kitchen and listened with me, and then went and got his work flashlight, the big one he used for night surveys, and said he was going to walk the property line. I told him not to. He went anyway. He was out there for about 20 minutes. When he came back and he said he hadn't seen anything. He said there was an area near the fence line, our side, where the snow was disturbed in a wide area. Not tracks, just disturbed, like something had been there and shifted around. He took a picture of that too. We talked about calling the county. Saying what, though? Saying our neighbor's kid stood in our yard, and we can hear something from the trees at night. We didn't call anyone. We drove back to my parents for Christmas, and stayed for about 9 days. When we got back to the house, there was no sign that anything had happened while we were gone. No tracks. No marks. The snow in the yard was smooth and unbroken. I want to say that after that things went back to normal, but I'm not sure they did exactly. The tracks didn't come back. The sounds didn't come back. We stopped seeing the boy. I saw the woman once more in January hanging something on the line again. Same thick gloves. The cattle never came back into the far field before we moved out in March, when Marcus's contract ended. The thing I keep coming back to is the way the boy was standing. He brought the bucket out there, and he was holding it and not leaving. and he was looking at the trees like he was waiting for something to come close enough to take whatever was in it, but not so close that it would be a problem. And then he said that thing, whatever he said, and whatever was in the trees apparently cooperated, or didn't come closer. I don't know which. I don't know what they were feeding. I don't know why it came toward our property instead of theirs, or whether the bucket routine was supposed to keep it from doing that. I don't know what made the tracks. A person I trusted had a look at the photo and said they'd never seen anything like it, and that person has a lot of experience with the outdoors, which is why I'd asked. Marcus still has the pictures on his phone. We've looked at them a few times. We don't talk about it much. I just wanted someone else to know about it, I think. That's the only reason I'm telling you. I don't have a way to end this or explain it, because I don't know how it ends or what the explanation is. That's just where it stops for me. So there's this building I lived in. I want to say that first because everything else depends on it. It's a converted mill on the east side of a town I moved to after I got out of treatment. My sponsor knew the landlord or knew someone who did. He said it was quiet and the rent was low, and there was a meeting 3 blocks away on Tuesday and Thursday nights, which I needed at the time. I said okay. I didn't see the place before I signed anything. I just moved in with 2 bags and a mattress I bought off Facebook Marketplace. The building used to make upholstery stuffing, foam and batting, and that kind of thing. The landlord told me this like it was a selling point. He was proud of the industrial history. There were old photographs in the lobby, black and white. Men in aprons standing next to machinery. The apartments were carved out of what used to be the factory floor. High ceilings, exposed brick. The windows were new, but the frames were painted over so many times they didn't open all the way. There were 6 units. I was in 4B, which was the second floor, back corner. The first thing I want to tell you about is the heating system, because you need to understand it before the rest makes sense. The building used these old cast iron grates, the kind that sit on the floor and connect to a central duct system that runs vertically through the whole building. Each apartment had 2 or 3 of them. In winter you could hear them tick and groan when the heat came on, but sometimes, not all the time, you could hear things coming up through them, not clearly, like hearing someone talk in the next room through a wall. You'd catch a word or a tone, but not a sentence. I thought it was just the building. Old buildings make noise. That's what I told myself. The tenants mostly kept to themselves. I knew the guy in 3A by sight, because we used the same parking spot rotation. There was a couple on the ground floor I saw maybe twice. An older man named Gerald who always nodded, but never stopped walking. And then there was Valerie. Valerie was in 2A, directly below me. She'd lived there for 4 years, which was longer than anyone else. She ran the laundry schedule. That sounds like a small thing, but she took it seriously in a way that was hard to dismiss. There was a sign-up sheet on a clipboard in the laundry room, and she updated it weekly. And if you left a load sitting in the washer past your window, she would knock on your door. Politely. Always politely. She carried a small notebook. Brown cover, spiral-bound. She wrote in it often. I assumed it was a planner or grocery lists or something. People have their systems. I liked her at first. She was friendly in a way that didn't ask anything of me. She'd say good morning and mean it, but not linger. When I moved in, she told me the laundry system, and I said I'd follow it, and she said great, and that was it. She didn't ask what I did or where I was from, or why I'd moved there. Most people asked those things, and I was tired of the answers I had to give. So Valerie not asking felt like kindness. I don't know exactly when things shifted. It wasn't one moment. It was more like you're reading, and you realize you stopped understanding the sentences a few paragraphs back, and you don't know where it went wrong. The first thing I noticed was the coffee. I had switched from coffee to tea maybe 2 weeks into living there. Not for any dramatic reason. Just that coffee was making me jittery, and I was already sleeping badly, and I thought tea might help. I didn't tell anyone. I barely registered it as a decision. But one morning Valerie passed me in the hall and said something like, "How's the tea working out for you?" And I said, "Fine." "How did you know?" and she said she'd seen me with a mug, which could be true. I have a specific mug, blue with a white stripe, and I carry it around. She could have seen it through an open door or in passing. I let it go. Then there was the thing with my mother. My mother and I had a difficult year. She called sometimes, and sometimes the calls ended badly. This is not unusual for people in my situation in their first year. It comes up in meetings, in general terms. But one afternoon, Valerie stopped me by the mailboxes and said, in a completely normal tone, "Did your mom ever call you back?" And I said, "What?" And she said she'd heard me mention my mother the other day. She was just following up. I couldn't think of when I'd mentioned my mother to her. I couldn't think of a single conversation where that would have come up. I said something like, "Yeah, we talked," and moved on. But I was thinking about it afterward, and I kept going back over our conversations, and I couldn't find it. The one that really stopped me was the podcast. I had been listening to a true crime podcast, a specific episode about a case in the 70s, and I had fallen asleep in the middle of it. My phone was on the nightstand, playing, and I woke up at some point and turned it off. I hadn't talked about it to anyone. I hadn't looked it up at work or searched for it on my laptop. It was just something I put on at night. And the next day, Valerie mentioned it. She said something like, "That case from the 70s is strange, isn't it?" And I said, "What case?" And she named the specific episode. She said she'd read about it somewhere recently and thought it was interesting. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was a coincidence. But I was standing there, and something was happening in my head that I couldn't quite catch up to. I checked my phone. I went through every app and looked at permissions. Microphone, location, camera. I turned off everything I could find. I went through the Bluetooth menu and looked at connected devices. Nothing unusual. I did this twice. I looked up whether certain apps could record passively and found a lot of conflicting information, and none of it led anywhere specific. I'm not technical. I got frustrated and put the phone down. The grates. I started paying attention to the grates. There were two in my apartment, one near the kitchen and one in the bedroom. I crouched down next to them and listened. You could hear the building, a hum from somewhere below, occasionally something that was almost a sound. I put my hand near the bedroom one and felt a slight current of air moving up. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't confront Valerie. I want to be honest about that. I thought about it. I thought about what I would say and how she would respond, and every version of that conversation ended with me sounding like I'd lost it, which maybe I had. The first year is hard. You think things. You're not always sure which thoughts are yours and which ones are the disease, or the recovery, or whatever you want to call it. I was in a meeting one Tuesday, and someone was sharing about paranoia, and I thought maybe that's what this is. Maybe I'm just looking for patterns, because I have a brain that does that. But I kept being careful. I stopped talking on the phone in my apartment and started walking to the parking lot. I turned the TV on when I was having calls I didn't want overheard. I felt like an idiot doing it. I also kept doing it. One Sunday in February there was a snowstorm. It came in fast, earlier than the forecast said. I was at my Thursday meeting, which they'd moved to Sunday that week because of a scheduling thing at the church. The snow started coming down hard about halfway through, and I decided to leave before the roads got bad. I got back to the building maybe 45 minutes earlier than I normally would have been. The mechanical room is in the basement. It's where the boiler is, and the water heater, and all the ductwork. Tenants aren't supposed to go in there. There's a sign. The door is usually locked, but it doesn't always latch right. I'd noticed that before. I was coming in through the back entrance, which is closer to the basement stairs, and the mechanical room door was open. Not wide open, a few inches, and there was light coming from inside, which there shouldn't have been unless someone was in there. I don't know why I stopped. I wasn't looking for anything. I was wet from the snow, and I wanted to go upstairs, but I stopped and I looked through the gap. Valerie was kneeling on the floor next to a section of duct pipe. She had her ear against it. Her eyes were closed. She was very still. The notebook was open on the floor beside her. The pipes in there are labeled. That's normal, I think. Maintenance labels. But these labels were different. They were small pieces of paper, white. taped on with regular tape, and they had apartment numbers written on them. 1A, 2A, 3A for B, which is me, and under each number there were notes. I couldn't read all of them from where I was standing. The writing was small, and there was a lot of it, but I could see mine. For B, there were 3 entries written in red, and the ink looked new, the kind of new where it's still a little glossy. I don't know how long I stood there. Not long, maybe 10 seconds. She opened her eyes and turned and saw me. She smiled. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She smiled the way you smile when you know someone's schedule well enough to be surprised they're home early. Like she was making a quick mental adjustment. She didn't look caught exactly. She looked like she was recalculating something. I said her name. She said, "Hey, you're back early." Like that was the thing to say. Like that was the normal response to what I was looking at. I said, "Yeah, the snow." She nodded and started to stand up, and she closed the notebook. And she said the boiler had been making a sound, and she'd been trying to figure out which unit it was coming from. She said the landlord was slow to respond to these things, and someone had to keep track. I said, "Okay." I left. I went upstairs. I moved out 6 weeks later. I told the landlord it was a commute issue, which wasn't true, but was easier. I found a place across town that was more expensive, but I figured out a way to make it work. I never talked to Valerie again after that night, except to pass her in the hall once. She waved. Normal. Like nothing. I still think about the labels. The red ink. The 3 entries that were recent. I don't know what she was writing down, or how long she'd been doing it, or whether it was just me or everyone in the building. I don't know if the duct system actually carries sound clearly enough for any of this to work the way I think it might have. I've looked it up a couple of times, and the results are inconclusive. Old industrial buildings can have unusual acoustics. That's a real thing. I don't know what she did with whatever she collected. I don't know if she showed it to anyone, or if it just went into the notebook and stayed there. I don't know if she's still doing it to whoever lives in 4B now. Gerald, the older man who nodded in the hall. I wonder sometimes about Gerald. That's really all I have on it. We rented the place in June of '98. It was a converted garage behind an older couple's house. And I say converted, but what I mean is someone had put down carpet and called it done. Lisa was my girlfriend at the time. We'd been together about 2 years, and we were trying to save money before the fall semester started. And this place was cheap enough that we could put away a real amount each month if we were careful. The neighborhood was regular enough. Ranch houses, old trees. One of those streets where everybody has lived there too long, and nobody waves. What backed up to it was marshland, and beyond that, electrical substations. You could see the towers from the backyard. At night they hummed. Not loud, but constant. The kind of sound you stop noticing after a while, and then remember when you're trying to sleep. The couple whose house it was, the Ackermans, were probably in their mid-70s. I didn't know their first names. I'm not sure we ever asked. They were around during the day, but quiet about it. The husband did yard work every evening, which I noticed, because he wore hearing protection while he did it. The earmuff kind, bright orange. No radio. No reason I could figure out. He just wore them while he clipped a hedge that ran along the back fence. Every evening. Same stretch of hedge. We had our own entrance on the side of the garage, so we didn't have to go through their house. But their back door, the one into their kitchen, was never locked. I know because Lisa borrowed eggs once in the first week and just walked in after knocking and nobody answered. She told me about it that night like it was funny. Neither of them locked anything. Not the shed, not the side gate with the rusted latch, not the kitchen door. It didn't seem like carelessness. It seemed like it just hadn't occurred to them. We were out there maybe 3 weeks before I started noticing the sound. And I want to be careful about how I describe it, because I've gone back and forth on this a lot, and I don't want to make it into more than it was. It came from the direction of the marsh. It happened late, around midnight or after, and it wasn't every night. More like every few nights at first. The closest thing I can say is it sounded like coughing, but wet. and underneath that there was something that scraped or dragged. Not like metal on metal, more like something being pulled across a surface that didn't want to give. Those two sounds together, the wet coughing thing and the dragging, not at the same time but close together, back and forth. Lisa heard it too. She said it was probably an animal. She made a joke about alligators, which didn't make sense geographically, and she knew it. But that's the kind of joke you make when you don't want to talk about a thing directly. I went with it. We both went with it. What I kept coming back to, though, was the hedge. The Ackerman property ran along the back fence, and the hedge was thick, maybe 4 feet deep at the base, and it ran the full width of their yard. He trimmed it every evening, and it was always the same section, the back half of the yard, closest to the fence and the marsh. I started paying attention to when he did it, and it was always after 5, but before dark. He would put on the orange ear protection and clip for 30 or 40 minutes, and then go inside. He was methodical about it. He never seemed to be making it shorter, just maintaining a shape that was already established. I didn't say anything about this to Lisa. I don't know why exactly. I think I thought I was just noticing things I'd have noticed anywhere. The power went out in the second week of July. It wasn't a storm. The air was completely still. One of those nights where the humidity just settles on everything and doesn't move. It went out all at once across the whole block. 1 second the air conditioner was running and the refrigerator was humming, and then none of it was. And what was left was the insect noise and that sound from the marsh, which was closer than I had heard it before. We didn't have anything useful. A couple of flashlights in a drawer, one that worked. Lisa found some candles. We sat there for a while and the sound kept coming, and it was close enough now that I could hear the 2 parts of it more clearly, the wet part and the drag, and they were separated by maybe 5 or 10 seconds each time. At some point I said I was going to step outside and see if the whole street was out, which was true, but I also just wanted to move around. Lisa came with me. The Ackermans were already in their backyard. That's the part I've thought about the most, and I want to say it plainly. We came out and they were there, standing in their backyard in slippers, and they were not surprised. They were not reacting to something that had just happened. They were positioned. The husband had a lantern, battery-powered, and he was holding it low by his side. Not on yet. The wife had her arms crossed, and she was looking toward the back fence. We said something. I don't remember what. Probably something about the power. The husband nodded. He turned the lantern on and aimed it toward the fence line. And he said, in a voice I can only describe as the voice you use when you are telling someone to do something they already know they need to do. He said, "Easy now." That's what he said. Easy now. Something moved behind the hedge. I don't know what else to call it. There was movement, large and slow, and the hedge responded to it. The top of it bowed in toward us, and then the section to the right did, and then the section past that, one after another down the length of the yard, like something was moving along the outside of the fence, and the hedge was showing us where. It wasn't fast. Whatever the weight of it was, it moved carefully. That's the only word I have. Not slow like it was struggling. Slow like it was choosing each step. Lisa said we should go back inside, and I agreed with her out loud. I was already facing the garage, but the old woman turned her head and said, "Don't run." She said it immediately, like she'd been waiting for one of us to say we were leaving. She didn't look at us when she said it. She was still watching the hedge. She said it follows running. And then she said, "Just stay still." So we stayed still. The movement in the hedge stopped toward the end of the yard, near the corner of the fence closest to the marsh, and didn't start again. The husband kept the lantern aimed in that direction for probably 2 or 3 minutes without moving. His wife didn't move either. Then our flashlight, Lisa's hand. The beam went across the top of the fence, just for a second, and I saw something rest on top of the post at the corner. It was there, and then it was not there. It slipped back into the reeds before I could put a shape to it beyond what it looked like. And what it looked like was a hand. The proportions were wrong for a hand in ways I couldn't pin down in that moment because I only saw it briefly. But it was shaped the way a hand is shaped. The husband turned the lantern off. He said something to his wife, not to us, and she nodded, and they went back inside through the kitchen door, which was unlocked as always, and they closed it behind them. The power came back on about 20 minutes later. The air conditioner in the garage kicked on, and all the clocks started blinking. We went inside and didn't talk about it that night. That's not a significant detail. I'm just being accurate. What we did do over the next few days was pay closer attention to things we'd been noticing without discussing. The back gate had a bolt on the inside, but it was never thrown. The shed in the corner of the Ackerman yard, closest to the marsh side, had its padlock always looped through the hasp, but never closed. I went and looked at it one afternoon when they weren't around. I pushed on it and it opened. Inside there was yard equipment, nothing unusual, and some cardboard boxes on shelves, and on the floor, several shallow plastic trays, the kind people use to start seeds, and they were filled with what looked like table scraps, old food, the kind that would have been thrown out. It didn't look fresh. It was arranged, not dumped, more like it had been placed. I closed the shed, and I didn't go back in. The Ackermans never mentioned that night. The husband continued trimming the hedge each evening in the orange ear protection. He nodded to me once over the fence while I was sitting outside, the way you nod at someone you've seen before. We moved out at the end of August, which was already the plan. Nothing else happened before then that I would point to. There were nights I thought I heard the sound again from the direction of the marsh, and there were nights I was probably just listening for it. I looked up the address once, a few years later, when we had internet in the apartment. The Ackermans weren't there anymore. I don't know if they moved or died or what. Someone else owned it. I didn't look into it past that. I don't know what was in the marsh. I've thought about it, and I don't have an answer. Something lived back there, and it came close sometimes, and the Ackermans had worked out some arrangement with it over the years, or some way of managing it. And we happened to be there. That's the closest I can get. The hand on the fence post. I keep coming back to that. The way it was there and then wasn't. I keep trying to remember it more clearly, and I don't think I'm going to get anything more than what I've already said.